Welcome everybody. So today what I'd like to do is show a training game I played. This was played at classical time control face to face, 30, 90, a game in 30 plus. This was the first classical game I've now played in like 15 months. And I thought it was a very interesting game. In the interest of keeping my training as private as possible, I am not going to share with you who my opponent was or even what color I was. But we will go over this game, which I thought was very interesting. So it started off as a semi-Slav, like so, g3, dc4, bishop g2, and I recommended knight bd7 in my chessable course, but in this game black played b5, which is also playable. The main drawback of playing this way, as opposed to starting with knight bd7, is it allows knight e5. So there comes a6. Black does not need to worry about knight takes c6 because there is queen b6, and there's no good discoveries with bishop b7 coming next. But the game continues with castles, bishop e7, and b3. Has anybody ever seen this position before? Says maybe I have. Okay, so a couple people have. So in my opinion, the best move is probably b4. There was a Dingler and So game that went this way, that went knight e4. Knight a4 is also unclear. There's all sorts of interesting complications that happen, but in this game, black took the pawn, which is probably not the best move, but also how bad can it be? Or actually, hang on. I'm just realizing now that it was actually bishop b7 first, of course. Yeah, so in this game, black took the pawn. It's supposed to be bishop b7 instead of bishop e7. That's just a product of it being 11 in the evening where I am. But yeah, so after cb3, ab3, bishop e7, bishop b2, castle, and knight e4. Let's start here. So obviously the battle lines have been drawn. I think it's totally obvious that white has full compensation for the pawn thanks to his active pieces and the pressure along the g2 a8 diagonal lasering down on the c6 pawn, making it hard for it to break out, and the bishop on b7 is passive and the rook on a1 is active. There's no doubt white is absolutely has good compensation for the pawn here. The question is he better? And what should black be doing in this position? Because ultimately black has an extra pawn, and if he can consolidate that and break out of his passive situation, he should be in reasonably good shape. But that's not necessarily the easiest thing to do. So let's start here. What do we want to play with the black pieces and why? There's more than one decent move, but I kind of like the one that was played in the game. So we have one interesting suggestion from James Chirilov, which we'll get to. Not sure I love it, but interesting. Okay, so so a couple people have already given me knight bd7. This is a mistake. Why is this a mistake? Be careful. Okay, 3 people have the wrong refutation. Zoe, that is correct. All right. Yeah, we need to make sure we get the move order right here, because if white takes on f6 directly, we will go bishop takes f6, and now following knight c6, there's no need to capture this knight, and black can go queen b6, and he's absolutely fine. He will kick the knight with rook a c8 next with nice good active pieces. But if white starts with knight takes c6, you will not have this luxury, because the bishop on e7 is loose, which means you'll have to do something like this, and rest assured, this is not what you want. This is going to get very ugly very fast. So, that I don't think is great. A few people have given me knight takes e4, and a couple people gave me f5 here. The problem is I'm really worried that we're going to have real trouble moving, basically. Like, I don't see how we're ever going to get this knight out. I think if we ever play c5, we're going to get ourselves checkmated. And I'm even worried about white throwing something like b4 next to just clamp the position completely and meet bishop b4 with queen b3. When things could get ugly. At any point, e4 could come, even g4 could come. And I'm worried that there's basically no counterplay, so I don't love this option. I believe the computer gives knight takes e4 as best, but it feels incredibly passive to me. I think it doesn't like f5 afterwards, if I recall. But I really like the way that black chose to play the game, which is a little bit different. So far, nobody has come up with this. I think it's a very interesting move, though. Okay, so Austin has it. Austin, you want to share with us? Okay, let me find you, Austin 10. Okay, ask to unmute.
My move was knight fd7.
Yeah, so why do you want to make this move?
To trade off his e5 knight and get my knight on BA out. And so there's no knight takes c6.
I quite like this move, which challenges the e5 knight. So a big part of understanding this position is I think if white is ever allowed to play knight c5, you're going to be in massive trouble. So a couple of people gave me a5 or some move like this, and I'm very worried that if we get some structure like this one, once this bishop has become open and the d6 square has been weakened, it's going to be very hard for black to keep this under control. In fact, I'm quite worried we're just going to lose immediately. This seems very bad. So I think we really want to fight for the c5 square. Now, one way we can do that is to just take e4 and not let the white knight get there, but I prefer this way, which I thought was interesting as well. Okay, so next up, this move also has the added benefit of challenging white's active knight on e5. And here white called the bluff and played queen c2. Okay, now this is a critical decision. This one shouldn't be wildly hard in terms of what not to do, but what to do is a little bit tougher. So first question, are we going to pull the trigger on knight takes e5? Obviously, we should think a bit about that. Greg, if you want, we can make a poll. Do we take e5 or not?
Sorry, I'm not on my computer, so I can't. Okay. Coaster, are you able to make polls yet? Or?
Oh, okay, never mind then. Well, the real question, first question is, are we going to take this knight? Second question is, if yes, how do we justify it, or how do we expect the game to proceed? And if no, what are we going to do instead? And if anyone wants to share their move with me, please let me know with your exclamation mark or whatever it is. So Austin, I don't love that move. I think it makes a huge weakness. All right. So look, guys, if we can take e5, we definitely should. We'd very much like to do that. The only question is, can we get away with it? So first thing, let's consider, can we do this, or what's white going to do to us if we take on e5? Let's actually just do, okay, now let's just say, are we able to take e5, or what's white going to do to us if we do? Okay, so people are sort of pointing out that the problem with this is I don't think you're going to stop this knight from landing on d6, which is going to be very painful. So yeah, Ashish, that's also a good point, which we will get to soon. Yeah, so the problem is here, rook d1 and knight d6 comes very fast, which is an issue. So the next step is, what are we going to do instead? We don't want to throw away the concept of knight takes e5, but we're aware that it doesn't yet work here. What are we going to do? So, yeah, Ashish has a good move. You want to share with us? A couple of people gave this, actually. Okay, let's ask Ashish. Okay, why can't I find? Oh, Ashish, it doesn't have an H. I see. Okay.
Oh, yeah, I said queen b6.
Okay, why do you want to make this move?
To be fair, I just want to get my pieces out. That was the main point, and stop knight c5.
Yeah, you want to stop knight c5. You don't want to let this move come in at the wrong moment. That would be a very big problem if it were to happen. So queen b6 is a very sensible move. It continues development and proceeds along with fighting for control of the c5 square. But okay, white went rook fd1. Now again, we have a choice to make. Are we going to take on e5 or not? And here the decision is a little bit more complicated than last time. Last time it was easy because what we saw was following knight e5, d e5. We're not really able to stop knight d6 because if we play c5 to challenge this knight, it's not rocket science, but what's about to happen to us. Yeah, just knight f6 and bishop b7, and we lose our face. But after queen b6, rook fd1 matters are not as clear. And now we have a decision to make again. Do we take this knight or do we not take it? And if we don't, what do we do instead? And why? So guys, I don't think we want to play knight f6. The knight just came from d7, and this will allow knight c5. And guys, you really want to be careful about playing the move f6. So for example here, the biggest reason that black's position is okay, because he's so much less activity, and obviously his extra pawn doesn't matter much right now. The biggest reason that he seems basically okay to me is that he doesn't have any weaknesses. And as soon as you play f6, this is now a huge weakness on e6. All white has to do to basically just win is go b4, queen b3, and this game is over. So you have to be very, very careful about playing a move like f6. So additionally, I think also knight d3 is a pretty sensible move that white might even want to make voluntarily. So Alexander has an interesting idea. I don't think it's right, but it's an interesting one we should discuss. Do you want to share with us? All right, so let's get to Alexander.
Yeah, so my idea was to play f5 and kick white's knight back and then play knight takes e5.
Right, so something like knight d2, knight e5 now, and here you're not as worried about white's knight coming somewhere nasty, right?
Yeah.
Okay, but I think white is in for a penny, in for a pound. This is coming. And this looks very scary to me. So I don't know how you would want to play. Probably you would take this one, right?
I think so, yeah.
And we get something like this. Ay. You are 2 pawns up, but that will not last, and I'm very worried something's about to drop in the near future, and these guys are just never going to move. I think that this position, again, the pawn on f5 is a real issue. I would much rather it back on f7 so that at some point you could play f6, kick this knight, force white to make up his mind, take one of the pawns, and then get your pieces out. But here, like, you're just not going to move. I mean, I don't know, it's e4 or something. No, e4, there's c5. But, like, I just don't think you're ever going to, like, make another move, essentially. And this is a very scary position. Additionally, white could maybe even consider something more aggressive, like if he just tucks the queen back on even queen d3. Like, you cannot play rook d8. Bishop a3 is coming, or bishop a3 maybe not, but like rook ac1 is coming. I have a feeling black is in massive trouble here. And again, I really don't like this f5 advance if we can help it. I think the 2 extra pawns don't matter very much at this point. And yeah, anyhow, this was interesting, but I think there's a better option. Okay, so we have a few interesting points. So the first question here is, can we get away with taking the knight on e5? The answer is no, but there's a very specific reason. And I'd like you guys to figure out why we can't take on e5. What is it that we're actually scared of? So for example, what Daniel has said, or someone has said, is take here, rook ac1, and it seems hard for black to hold the pawn on c5. But how much does black really care if he loses the pawn on c5? And yeah, Jed has this right. I think here it's not even close. I think you're just checkmated. I mean, take, and I think this is absolutely gone. Your bishop has to go to d8 to avoid bishop b7 equal. Okay, this is made in like 3 more moves. It's not even close. So knight f6. So black's facing a little bit of a quandary here. His problem is that he wants to take on e5, but in order to do that, he's going to have to somehow be ready for knight f6 coming. And that's not easy to do because if we play f5, we're going to walk right into knight c5. And additionally, f5 is a move that we don't really want to make. So here I think black should be a little bit more patient. He doesn't have to do anything rash. The one saving grace in black's position is that he's very solid, and it's not like white's actually threatening anything yet. I mean, rook fd1 is a good natural developing move, but it's not like any of black's pieces are on prise as a result. And things that we should be keeping in mind here are also how to complete development and what the key squares are to fight for. Already here I mentioned that I'm a little bit concerned about this move knight d3 to fight for the c5 square. So I actually think black has a very nice resource here that does that helps his position considerably. I don't think we need to be that married to the concept of knight takes e5. It seems like it's going to be very hard to pull off. So what are we going to do? So yeah, James Chirilov, you want to share your answer? This was correct. All right, so that's fine, James.
Yeah, so I thought like if you go a5 and he goes knight d3, you have knight a6, and you just control the c5 square, you might have ideas of like knight b4 in the future, but it just you kind of stay solid.
So a5, and it's funny because you can't play knight a6 next because the knight on d7 will hang. But this is good prophylaxis for two reasons. One is that it stops knight d3, or at least makes it a lot less enticing because of knight a6. Now, actually, if I recall, I believe knight d3 is the best move here anyway. But it certainly discourages knight d3. So, for example, other moves, you really do not want to let a knight to c5. Somebody recommended rook d8, and this would walk right into knight c5, for example, when the tactics are going to favor white. Thanks to the hanging rook on d8. And this knight d3 move, I think, if white is able to play knight d3 and b4, you can basically resign. You will never make another active move for the rest of the game. So I think a5 is good prophylaxis against that. But another thing that a5 does is it also restricts this rook on a1 to some degree, because one of the biggest problems with our queen side. Austin, what do you mean, why didn't I play it last move? I didn't even tell you if I was black or not. So one of the big problems with our queen side is that this rook on a8 also has no great way into the game. We'd love to play a move like rook c8 through the knight on b8 to prepare c5. It's not even that these pieces are that bad, actually, honestly. I think it's really the rook that's not great. And the idea that a4 is hanging over white's head means that this rook on a1 is a bit restricted. Because if you start thinking here, I mean, maybe white's next move is just knight d3. But if you were just sort of in sandbox mode and letting white play a bunch of moves in a row, you'd think rook ac1 would be pretty high on his list of candidate moves, because it helps him play knight c5, it brings the rook to a nice active square, and by playing a5, we're discouraging this from happening. Now, I believe that knight d3, according to the machine, is the best move, and it found some point that after knight a6, you can play bishop c3. When I think black has to play knight b4, and I don't know, probably white's a little bit better in a position like this one, but it's not wildly convincing. But the move that white played in the game, I think, is a much, much stronger decision in practice. And it was actually a really nice one. I'm going to give you guys a chance to try to find it, actually, for the white pieces. I get it, knight d3 is probably objectively best, but the move that white played really put black under a lot of pressure. So what should white play here? It was a very nasty move, I have to say. Jed Sloan, are you trying to lose? Come on. Let's be a bit more serious than that. It's not the dumbest idea, but this is obviously the wrong moment for it. Okay, Austin, that's actually very reasonable, but I think this is not the right moment for it. Or it's an interesting idea. Okay, so a couple of people have given me bishop a3, and I think most of y'all's point is that in the event of b4, this bishop will drop back to b2, right? And then you've weakened the c4 square, which black is not happy about. The problem with this move, I think, is that without this bishop like lasering down to the f6 square, I think I'm now significantly less intimidated by your kingside attack. So let's say I take this one, and then I take this and I offer a pawn back with c5. If you take c5, I think black has to be fine. I'm not nearly as convinced that you're going to checkmate me here when you're not gaining a tempo on this bishop and you don't have this bishop supporting. So for example, if I take on g2 and say, I don't know what, queen d2, king h8, I don't actually think you're going to mate me here. It's really annoying for white that e takes f6 did not come with tempo. Does that make sense to everybody? So bishop a3 it's a very clever idea. You'd really like to provoke black into playing b4 if at all possible, but I think here we can't forget about this knight takes e5 concept. Just because it didn't work the previous two moves doesn't mean it will never work. So, but this is very actually quite close to the right answer, I think, in terms of how white should be playing. Your goal is sort of provoke b4 because that would really lead to some critical weakening of black's position. Yes, Daniel, you want to share with us? Okay. The one guy who's got it right doesn't want to share. Anyone else want to share? So Raja, that's a bit slow, I think. A lot of people are suggesting bishop c3. It's not. Doesn't strike me as that scary. It's also walking straight into the pawn advances later. At some point, I'm wondering if I can take this and then take with the bishop on f6, and then just let you take g7. Here, like, this bishop on c3 is going to get totally brutalized once these pawns start moving. Yeah. Anyhow, Jed's got the move right. So, Jed, you want to share with us what you think white should play? Yeah, Servagna as well. Jed or Servagna, anybody want to share? Okay, so let me get Servagna. All right.
So I said queen c3 with the idea of knight takes d7, knight takes, and then d5.
Right. This is really nasty. So looking at this from black's point of view, when white plays queen c3, this is not a remotely subtle move. It's very, very obvious what they have in mind, right? It's incredibly straightforward. There's no complications to it whatsoever. That said, go stop it. Find a way to stop like an incredibly direct threat that doesn't completely ruin your position. And I think this is one of the hardest positions you guys are going to get today. Black is okay here, but boy, is it tough. This is a very important sequence to find, and you need to not only see the first move, but see a very important idea afterwards. Okay, Jed, it's okay. Get another right answer and we'll talk. Black is under very real pressure here, and he can get absolutely slaughtered in like 3 more moves if he's not careful. There is a way out of this that I think is quite nice, actually, and black did find in the game, but it's really difficult. And you need like an actual variation and ideas behind. Just giving me one move is not going to be good enough here. It's really tough. Take some time. This is a critical decision. Roger, I think ignoring the threat is not a recipe for success. Jed, I don't think you can allow the knight to c5. I mean, it's a tough spot. Like, a couple of people have given me knight f6, but I think as soon as this knight lands on c5, you're in massive trouble. All right, so Nathan has a line you want to share with us, or Nathaniel, you want to share this line? I really don't believe in it, but we can take a look. Bishop f6, knight d6. Seems bad news. Bishop f6, knight g4 looks even nastier. No, this is scary, guys. It's a very tough position, but you need to have like an actual idea behind what you're up to. Just giving me a move is probably not going to get you very far. So this is almost, I mean, there's a couple other very difficult decisions that are coming up this game, but Let's start with this one and getting it right. All right, so look, a lot of people are giving me some version of, like, for example, rook c8 take to clear this rook out of the way and play bishop f8. But again, your activity is just so bad that as soon as you have like one weakness in the position, you immediately lose. It's not even close. A couple of people have given me bishop f6, but I think knight d6 is reasonable. I think knight g4 is exceptionally violent, and I think here you lose immediately. I think you just made it already, basically. So. Can we tolerate this queen on c3? Come on, guys. Okay, so Ashish is saying, what about b4, queen d2, and then f5? All right. So guys, if we're going to play b4, think about it. Once b4, queen c2 happens, what we did, white managed to successfully provoke black into playing b4, which is something that a lot of you guys wanted to do in the previous move with bishop a3, but here white managed to do it more successfully. Knight c4 is coming. If you're going to play b4, you have to think in advance what's going to happen after queen c2. How am I going to be ready to meet knight c4 next? That's the only way you can make b4 work. I don't think you want to play bishop b4. We'll just walk into knight d3 later. Okay, so Alexander has found the second best continuation, which is pretty reasonable. Aradhya as well. So one thing we can do is play b4 and then bishop a6. This is a couple people have suggested this. Now after knight c4, we take this knight. And if I recall, the computer said white was a little bit better here, but in practice, this strikes me as an absolute nightmare to play for black. Like, you'll never make an active move. You'll never have any counterplay. White's pieces are fantastic. His position plays itself. He can double his rooks on any file he wishes, C, A, you name it. It just, at some point, he will play queen back to c2 and the other knight to c4. I mean, the computer sort of barely holds this together, still thinks black's worse, but I think there's something much better than that. Has to be calculated very precisely. Guys, if your answer is one move long, there's not much point in me interacting with it. Hope I don't get mated, Zoe. That doesn't sound very optimistic. I also can tell that you will get mated. It doesn't seem that hard even in that variation. Plus, you're also dropping pawns, and yeah, it's not going to work. Nathaniel, that's reasonable, but it's not great. So Raja b4, and then, okay, hang on, b4, what is this? Knight e5 and bishop a6? No, you're going to get mated. This is gone. No, this is important, guys. It's a critical moment. I'll give you guys like a few more minutes, but it's a very critical decision. It's there. I mean, black will be fine if he finds it, but it's really tough. Okay, so a couple of people have given me f5 with this line, take, and now d5, knight f6, but I think d6 is the end of the world now. You'll have to play bishop d8. I mean, I can't imagine you play fe4. And then knight c5, and nah, this game is over. Okay, so Alexander found another line that's reasonable. It's not amazing, but a couple people have given me this line: b4, queen c2, take c5, and then playing bishop takes f6. This is decent, but first of all, did any of you guys consider this move? I mean, it doesn't work, but like, you should have been ready for it because it looks pretty scary. I don't think we want e5. This will let our pawn cover get ripped up. Yeah, this should be 4. And here, black's good. But yeah, I think this is not terrible for black, but it's very dangerous and skeptical. I mean, this is the kind of thing you do because you have to do it, not because you want to do it. Let's put it that way. And you have an option that's better than this. I'm going to give everyone like 2 more minutes to try to find the way here. b4, queen c2, king h8. But after b4, queen c2, you have to be very concerned about knight c4 coming next. James, I think that's going to get slaughtered pretty fast. You'll lose the c6 pawn, and then it's gone. All right, so maybe I've given you guys too hard a problem, but so b4 is correct. After queen c2, there's a very critical move here. I don't think you can get away with this, as a couple people have suggested. Among other things, knight d6 I think is concerning. You want knight d6 only is scary if this pawn hasn't already been to c5, because if the pawn's already on c5, knight d6, you don't care. You take g2 and you're good to go. But here, also, I'm just not sure I believe that you'll survive this, but even bishop d4 looks like a scary move. Lots of scary moves here. But so the move I was looking for here, there's a very nice prophylactic move, queen c7. And the point is that when we play b4, clearly what we're scared of is knight c4. This is what's coming. When that happens, our queen has to move. So when we play queen c7, here after knight c4, what are we going to do? Careful, guys. Yeah, people are finding this. Yeah, c5, taking advantage of white's queen leaving this, being blocked. After dc, what do we play? Looks like we should resign, but in fact we have a move. So Rohan has lost in one move. Let's see how many others lose in one move. Raja has lost in one move. Yes, Daniel, well spotted. Rohan lost again in one move. Jed lost in one move. You absolutely need this move, guys. This is the only way. You kick that knight, and then in the event of knight d6, bishop g2, black is good. There's some funny variations here with this knight to d6 and something like, say, bishop e4, and yeah, who knows what's going on here. I think the computer said this should be a draw somehow, but I don't know. Clearly it's complicating the game, and that's something black is happy about. But yeah, so the way you would come to this is basically you should always be considering c5 every move. And so here, c5, you get murdered by dc5. There's no question about it. Knight c5, and I can't even count the wins, but this is a good one to start. But the point is here, we realize that in the event of knight c4, you have this queen c7 move. So you think, wait a minute, c5 doesn't work because of dc, but then you realize that if you switch the move order with queen c7, that we have at least now prevented white from playing knight c4. And that being the case, it's actually not that easy for white to find his next move. I think white should probably play knight d3 to try to stop c5, but once you've played knight d3, the whole point of like burning two tempi on queen c3 back to c2 is to weaken the c4 square. And when you play knight d3, you're sort of admitting failure because you have weakened the c4 square, but you're not actually taking advantage of it by bringing the knight there. So this move queen c7, I think, does a very good job of stopping knight c4. It's what you have to see in advance with b4. And of course, you also have to see that here you have the move f5, because if knight c5, as a couple of people gave after bishop e5, you're very much finished. This queen c7 move is very nice. And here, white played knight c5, which is sort of the move that a lot of the time we've been looking for. But in my opinion, this is completely the wrong moment for it. I think this was a big mistake, and black can take advantage of it. But it comes down to a piece of understanding. There's more calculation to be done later, which I want to give you guys a chance to do, so I'm just going to try to explain this. But basically, essentially in this structure where white has played d takes e5, not only has he doubled his e-pawn, so now black has a 3-on-1 majority, but he's also blunted his bishop. I do not believe in white's pawn structure, in white's compensation in this pawn structure without a knight. I think he absolutely needs a knight on e4 to be slamming on these two weak squares to cause black direct trouble. If he does not have a knight, I really don't think his compensation is that impressive. And so black can and should take this opportunity to chop this knight off the board. And this comes at a moment where I think you start to think about, for example, here, there's a very nice move, rook c8. Black doesn't want to play knight d7 yet because of queen e7. But basically here, when we sort of evaluate, just like, why is the d6 square so helpful for white if a queen or a rook go there? I really don't think it does that much. For example, after rook d6, knight d7, white can already resign. Black is going to play c5 next, get the white squared bishops off the board. The bishop on b2 is horrendously bad, and then the pawns start coming, and the rook on d6 looks nice and does absolutely nothing. So that's this I think would be very nice. Instead, white played queen d6, which was the best move, prophylaxis against knight d7. I think white probably should take with the pawn here, is the easiest way. When this position actually is some sort of very weird mutual stalemate. At some point, after the game, I took a shower the next day, and for like 20 minutes in the shower, I was just trying to imagine a plan for either side here, and I just couldn't do it. Every time I tried to do something active for either side, I lost. White can never push e4, e5. If he ever touches e4, we go c5. Black can never really play f6, so run into bishop h3 and stuff. There's no way for black to, like, let's say here, there's no way for black to move either of his rooks anywhere useful without the c6 pawn hanging. This probably would have been equal. In the game, white took on d6 with the rook, which was fine as well, but it had to be followed up correctly. So king f8. And here, I think white's basically fine here, but he has to be at least a little bit accurate, because black has a not wildly complicated plan. Something like, say, king e8 or maybe king e7, knight d7, rook c7, c5, and if this happens, the game is over. Now, that's not happening yet. White has a little bit of time before this comes into fruition, but he has to be a little bit careful. So we're going to take this from white's point of view now. Things have not gone particularly well. I think knight c5 was a bad move that did not help his cause. And now here, there's some defending to be done. So what are we going to do? In the game, white played, I think, the right plan with the wrong execution. So let's see what you guys come up with. Daniel, I don't think that works very well. All right, so a few people have given me bishop d4. I'm just going to assume that none of you have calculated a single move ahead because it looks very silly to me. Let's get an actual variation, guys. So, and we need an idea. Keep in mind, black's plan, king to like e7, e8, rook c7, knight d7. If he does that, he gets c5, and then you lose, is essentially how it goes. So that's not like wildly fast, but it's not too super slow either. So you have a few moves to try to make something happen. And you should be evaluating whether you think passive defense will hold here or whether you have to be looking for something more direct. Okay, so Aradia, that's exactly the right idea. Do you want to share it with us? It's the wrong execution, but okay, Daniel's got this sort of as well. But okay, so let's go with Aradia.
Yeah, I thought pretty much we should go like f4 and then maybe like, now I think e4, but originally I said g4 to go f5.
All right, so you're talking f4 and then some way to prepare f5 and go for it. How much time do you think we have to get f5 through?
Yeah, actually we have like 2 more moves, I guess. Not 2. I mean, like.
I think we actually just want to throw f5 next move and go e6 and blow up the position while black's development is still lagging. So I think this f4, f5, like just throwing this f pawn, e takes f5, e6, open up the b2 bishop, start attacking the king side where none of black's pieces are. I think this is a very sensible way of playing the game, but I think f4 was the wrong execution of it, and he should have played rook a d1 instead. The reason is that a big part of playing f4 is to go f5 and then e6. That being the case, black's king is going to be much, much better on the e7 square than the e8 square. For example, if black were to play king e8, we go f5 here, and then takes an e6, and now who knows what's going on. But after king e7, you no longer have this option. And so what I think white should have done is start with the move rook a d1. And the point is now in the event of king e7, a couple people gave me bishop d4 here, which I think is a very bad move, because now black will go knight d7. There's no rook takes d7 tricks for him to be scared of. Next move is rook c7, overprotecting everything, and then c5 comes, and then you basically lose. But what should white do with this bishop instead of going to d4? Yeah, people are seeing this. We go bishop c1. And this is where we see that having delayed f4, we have this threat of bishop g5. And in the event of h6, now bishop e3 comes. When we're ready to fight for this c5 square, but because we didn't use bishop d4, black is unable to play knight d7. Bishop c5 comes next, and here black is absolutely crushed. So essentially, after rook a d1, I believe black has to play king e8. This way, he's fast enough to meet bishop c1 in a proper way. But now and only now, because here bishop c1 doesn't threaten bishop g5. So here black should have enough time to organize his pieces semi-intelligently. But now, like with knight a6, for example. But the point is, now and only now, yeah, also here I should say, sorry, bishop c1, knight a6 also is very nice that rook d7 doesn't come with check. If rook d7, we have knight c5. And here, at this point, I think black is okay. But yeah, now and only now we go f4. And the point is we're ready to play f5 next, and black doesn't have a great way to stop it. f5 comes, e6 comes, blow up the position. I checked with the machine, computer called it equal, but I think draw is probably the least likely result. It just seems like it's wild and complicated, and this is what white wants, because if he gives black a move or two, he's going to lose the game. So instead, f4 was played. And this means that after king e7, I no longer have to worry about this bishop landing on g5. And the king coming to the e7 square is a big asset for black. So the game continued bishop d4, knight d7, rook c1, and now rook c7. And black is potentially ready for c5 next. All right. Apart from this early b4 queen c7 idea, which I think was really, really hard, white also here has a really hard task ahead of him. In fact, he actually has two moves here that are good enough to draw, but both of them have to require a lot of precision. So what's white going to do to save this game? This is really hard. So a couple of people are giving me bishop c5. I think this is a bit too desperate. E4 and then f5. No, you cannot. If black is able to play c5, you're going to lose very, very quickly. A good place to start is evaluating if c5 is a threat now or not. It's not the easiest thing to come up with. No, I think rook c5 is a bit too out there. There's no need. Take, and king d8, king e8, and I think you don't have enough. All right. Guys, if I'm allowed to play c5 here, like somebody gave me bishop h3 with the idea of f5. If I'm allowed to play c5, not only does this kick this bishop, but it also, I can anchor this guy on d5, and then f5 doesn't scare me anymore. So it doesn't work. And no, you're not stupid, everybody. Look, and white lost this game. I mean, it's not easy. This is a very tough defense. It's there, but it's difficult. So let's try to find a way. There's two moves here that are good enough to draw, actually. White played one of them, but then messed up later. g4, idea of bishop f2, bishop h4. All right. Guys, first step, is c5 a threat here, or is it not a threat? Serious question. Nobody has answered it yet. Okay, so now we're getting disagreement. Some people are saying it is a threat. Some people are saying it's not a threat. A good place to start is figuring it out. I think that it is a threat. So for example, let's suppose we were to play bishop f3 and black plays c5. We go something like this. This is the line you all calculate, and then I believe a4 should win. I don't think you're going to save this. The line I would suggest is take here. Let's say you play something like this. And the big problem that white is facing now is that his king is on the back rank. This means that rook a1 is a very serious threat, and one that you will have to respect. And you will probably have to make this move, which you absolutely do not want to make. What you would like to do is play rook d2, which would force rook b4, and now this is an easy draw, because these rooks are stuck forever, this king is cut off, and white can just do this business, and there's nothing else to say here. But this is not the case because your king is on the back rank. So you'll have to play rook d1 instead, and here I think the best plan for black is to put the rook on the c2 square, where it will defend the b2 pawn laterally, and say we go king f2 and rook c2. And now black is going to start going rook b3 and h5, h4. And the point is that when these rooks are on squares like c2 and b3, they do a much better job of not only defending this pawn, but also harassing white along the king side. And I think that here you're very likely to fall apart. So I believe that this is a serious threat. And the biggest reason that it's a threat is that white's king is going to be on the back rank. Otherwise, white would be saving the game. So that already should give you some kind of a hint. And yeah, people are suggesting this. King f2 was played. I think this is probably the more human of the drawing moves. Bishop takes c6 also actually holds. But there's a very important variation. Following rook a c8, the line goes rook d7. And I think somebody got this far and suggested king d8 and bishop b6 is a draw. But of course, king e8 is going to be played. And here, only move is bishop a4. And this is darn difficult. I mean, it's so natural to just take this rook. But in fact, actually, you can immediately resign bishop d5 is coming. So that is going to lose. But if you play bishop a4, and then here the point is if bishop c6, what does white play? Be careful. Yes, Rohan, well spotted. All right. A whole bunch of people have blundered this. Okay, so Rohan said the right move, and so far every single other person since then has said the wrong move. Yeah, a whole bunch of people are giving this, and then you can resign immediately. But white saves the game with bishop b6 instead, stopping rook c7, and this pin is annoying, and then a5 will hang. So that would have saved it. Instead, white played king f2 as discussed, and here I don't believe c5 is good enough because, as we saw, if we get this position with white's king not on the back rank, it means that here, rather than having to play the passive move rook d1, white can instead place the rook on d2, which will save the game. But it's still not easy. I'll just show how it got tougher later on as well. Following king f2, black played a4, which is best, and we got this position. And now d3. So here, white only has two serious moves. I mean, if e3 or whatever, rook takes d4 wins. So white has to play either bishop c3 or bishop c5, but this is an absurdly difficult defense. So in the game, white played bishop c5, which I think was the most human move. Bishop c3 was also possible. But here rook a2 comes. And now this is absurdly difficult for white because the only way to hold a draw here, during the game, I actually believed rook c7 was the best move and that this is a draw, and that rook c4 loses. These are both wrong, actually. I was wrong on both accounts. In the event of rook c7, black will play king d8. You cannot play rook b7 as knight c5 will win material with some forks. But here white will have to play rook c4. And during the game, I was thinking, do we want this position with the king on e7 or with the king on d8? And I thought that white would be making a draw in this version with the rook on c4, because with the king on d8, it means that after rook c2, rather than playing bishop b4 check with the king on e7, we will instead play bishop a5 check, which clears the b4 square for white's rook. However, this also loses, as here black has knight c5, and he's just in time after rook b5. We're threatening knight d3, so there's no bishop b6, and we're just in time for this move in king c6 before white can play bishop b6 to finish the game off. And here black wins. Black could have made a draw with, or white could make a draw instead with rook c4, with the point that after rook c2, he has this ridiculous idea, king e3. He wants to play king d3 next, at which point black will no longer be able to play b2. But if he pulls the trigger on b2, there is bishop b4 check. You cannot play king e8 because of rook c2. So you have to play king d8 and then check. And again, you cannot play king e8 because of rook c2, rook c8, bishop d8, bishop h4. You have to play king e7, and this is a draw. This, if you find this during a game, like, get ready to strip because you're going to get searched for an engine. White in the game played the more human move, which is bishop c5. Last thing we do before we call it a day. We are playing rook c1. Are we checking on c7 first or not, and why? Last thing we do before we call it a day. Let's get this right. In the game, white got it wrong and lost. Yes, James, you want to share with us? Okay.
Okay, yeah, so I thought if you go rook c1, black might have like f6 ideas to just like undermine your pawn chain, and it's just like very problematic. So I'd go rook c7 to force the king on the back rank, and then we can drop back, and it's probably a draw.
In the event of f6, black cannot take
we
with
can
the
just
king. This is the key point. And white saves it by 1 tempo in this line here. He's just in time. Of course, black to move now would win, but it's white's move and rook takes b2 saves him. So in the game, white played rook c1 directly, and here f6 is only winning move, which is tough. I mean, black played it, but if you start with b2, which is very tempting, now this is a draw because king e3 comes. And the problem is this king is coming to take this pawn very quickly. And so I calculated a line like king f7 here, and we take b2, and it's a draw. If you compare this position to what happens if you don't play b2 first, and white does something similar, take king f7. Here we see that we could have this exact same position with the pawn on b2 and rook on b1, but that's obviously a much worse version for black. Here, not only is white not taking the pawn directly, but also when he takes it, the rook lands on b3 rather than b2, and here after rook e5, it's all over, because in the event of rook b3, there's probably even rook e3. But yeah, if rook b2, rook b5, and the pawn ending is going to win because black's king is too close. So f6 is only winning move, b2 does not win. But yeah, in the game f6 was played, and then there's not too much more after that. Following ef, white tried this, but after king f3, e5, and e3. Now that we've broken out of this like pawn on e5, guarding the king, and pawn on e6, blocking black's king, finally black now can just sort of bring the king, and it's all gone. Yeah, so normally I end with some time for Q&A. It's now past midnight where I am, so I'm only going to answer like 3 questions, and then we'll call it a day. So I'll take 3 questions. One of them, which will not count where am I? I'm in Glasgow. I'm training with my coach, Jakob Ogert, and then in a week and a half or so, I'm looking forward to playing the Prague Masters, which will be my first classical tournament in 16 months. But yeah, I'm currently in Glasgow, United Kingdom. So 3 questions. Anyone else? Oh, it looks like a lot of people were confused about the timing. Okay. All right, 1 question. Who else is guys, I can't answer if I was playing black or white. I will not say who this game was against, nor will I say what color I was. But as you can tell, it was a pretty high level game. Who else is playing the tournament? It will be like Navarra, Jordan van Forest, Nguyen, Tai-Dai Van. I'm not sure, I'm wrong with the Vietnamese names, but the Czech Vietnamese player is also a pretty reasonable GM. I expect it'll be like 2,700 average or so I'm really looking forward to that. Do I like e4 or d4 more? In general, I prefer d4, but I think you absolutely have to play both moves. If you only play one, I mean, d4 is just so much more strategic, and e4 is so much more dynamic. I think if you only play e4 or d4, you're not going to have a diverse enough understanding of chess. You need to be able to play both dynamic and more strategic positions well. And if you only train yourself to play one, if you only get practice playing in one kind of the game, it's just not going to go as well for you. You're not going to go as far as a player. You need a diverse understanding. So while I personally lean more towards d4, I play e4 a lot too. You definitely want to play both moves. All right. Do I like playing the Grunfeld against d4? Yeah, I think it's a good line. It's very forcing. It's not a great line to play for a win because it's so forcing and so many lines are very dry. But I've enjoyed the Grunfeld, and I've used it in the right opening, the right one. All right, last question. How well does the hippopotamus work defensively? Here's a little nugget of brilliant chess wisdom, 2700 level wisdom. Any opening named after an animal is terrible. We will end it on that note. I have to go to bed.